This talk is called Courage for the Blank Page, and it's about how do we empower ourselves to compose brand new work, because as so many creatives know, beginning is often the most difficult part of any creative process, and really any process at large. But I want to speak in this talk to sort of two sides of this. One is the emotional side of how do we put ourselves in the right headspace? How do we sort of quiet the critical voices in our heads? How do we make our work with generosity? And the other will be sort of practical advice, tools you can use in your toolkit to help you do those very things. So just gonna take a look at everybody here. Hi, everybody. There's one quote that I'll use as kind of an umbrella over this conversation, and it's pretty well known. You all may have heard of a gentleman named Ernest Hemingway, and he has a quote, "All you have to do is write one true sentence." That's going to govern this presentation. But in terms of how you make work and how you generate momentum, writing is like a muscle. The more you exercise that muscle, the stronger that muscle becomes. And in writing, the muscle we're strengthening is our own capacity to communicate not only actions, words, and events, but the emotional and sensory landscape in which they occur. We're not simply furnishing a room as writers. We are responsible for the light by which we see an argument build inside that room and the manifold implications of its aftermath. So you also may think of this, there's a kind of famous Chekhov quote where he says, "Don't tell me it's nighttime, show me the moonlight glinting off a broken bottle." I'm paraphrasing it slightly, but it's the same kind of idea. There is an interior and an exterior to writing a true sentence. We cross our own minds. I'll call that the interior, which is our biases, our fears, even just essentially our point of view. We cross that space in order to reach what is external to us. So that's other people, tangible objects, a shared experience with other people, everything that takes place outside of ourselves and our minds. But our minds are what sort of filter everything. So there's the two sides. And once we reach that exterior and we're looking outside of ourselves, in order to describe that, we have to retrace our own interpretive mind in order to sort of render that in language. So for this reason, when we're experiencing writer's block or fear of the blank page, it's beneficial to begin by simply describing the exterior and trying to get there without filtering it through our own perspective. Now, that's easier said than done, but again, this is like working out. You're not going to bench 250 pounds the first time you walk into a gym, but you want to just get familiar and get your muscle memory familiar with this idea of describing what is outside of you, describing things you see, things you hear. Human beings can't experience anything really without a compulsive need to contextualize and or understand it according to our own mostly well-developed perspectives. So I want you, in thinking about how to get around writer's block, to just simply take for granted that the emotional and sensory landscape will come, because you cannot escape it. So just book it, it'll be there. What I want us to focus on is just the nuts and bolts of what we're looking at, what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're smelling, sticking with the sort of plainest description and rendering in language that we can. So often in my experience and in speaking with other poets and other writers, something that can be an impediment to beginning a new piece is this burden of wanting to communicate perfectly what it is that we're feeling and thinking. Um, that burden of communicating our own interior realities and the inevitable, as every writer knows, writing is failure. And that doesn't mean that it's a dismal experience necessarily. I'm talking about failure to achieve perfection. That's the failure. So it's all in all, it's pretty good. If a baseball player hits 400, they're an excellent hitter. That doesn't mean they're hitting every single ball. So we are reaching, it's like those fridge magnets. We're reaching for the stars, and if we miss, we'll land on the moon kind of thing. Um, so it's okay to fail, and we expect to fail. But nonetheless, failure can be disappointing and it can feel like a great amount of pressure. So one answer to that kind of responsibility is just to temporarily let it go. And by focusing completely on the exterior world without any efforts whatsoever to filter it through the prism of our own understandings or interpretations, doing that can release us from the specific burden of telling our own truths, so to speak. And what we're looking to do here is free ourselves from any unconscious concern we have to, quote, get it right, to be perfect, to say exactly what we feel and exactly what happened all at once. And I just want to take a moment here. Please, if anyone has any experiences with writer's block or with music maker's block or composer's block, whatever it is that you do, please feel free to volunteer that. I would love to talk about other people's experiences. I have some of my own that I'll get to, but just feel free to wave your hand or shoot something in the chat. But in terms of freeing ourselves from that inner critic that wants us to get everything perfectly right on our first foray, one way to sort of skirt that critical voice is to think about language in terms of parts of speech, just get very technical like we're robots. And two things we're going to do in our own writing, and this can be with writing that you do during this presentation, or because I will have some exercises for you, or writing you've already done, looking over it. This is an editing tool, a revision tool. But we are going to interrogate all adjectives and adverbs mercilessly. And then we are going to interrogate all verbs mercilessly. And what I mean by that is that we are going to put every single adjective in a given body of writing under a microscope and look to expel any sense of our own ego from that description. So, for example, think of a fuzzy caterpillar, kind of a familiar phrase. And it kind of makes you smile, doesn't it? The fuzzy caterpillar. That's because fuzzy as a descriptor is a kind of warm, comforting adjective. And it has a nostalgia and a childhood sort of factor, right? And you wouldn't describe a villain in a scary movie as fuzzy, even if technically that villain somehow was fuzzy, didn't shave, or maybe the villain was a caterpillar even. But if the caterpillar is doing violent things to other caterpillars, it sort of loses its fuzziness. But if you think of a caterpillar from the perspective of a caterpillar, are we kind of cute and soft and safe and oops, easily squished and who kind of cares? Or are we animals that need to wake up every day and find a way to feed ourselves and procreate and provide for our young and above all, stay alive? If you are a caterpillar doing those things, are you a self-proclaimed fuzzy caterpillar? Perhaps technically you are, but that phrase doesn't really communicate the truth, so to speak. And this is subjective, the truth of your experience as a caterpillar. When you're trying to avoid whatever preys upon caterpillars and you're trying to, set a good example for the young caterpillars coming behind you and et cetera, et cetera. You wouldn't say, I'm a fuzzy caterpillar. You might say, I'm an intrepid caterpillar, or I'm a beautiful caterpillar. But those are then biased in the other direction. So we want to kind of split the difference between a human being saying, oh, look at that cute little fuzzy caterpillar, and a caterpillar saying, I am an unheralded, beautiful caterpillar. So are there adjectives for a caterpillar that are neither pro caterpillar or anti caterpillar, but that either camp might use? You know, I think of a caterpillar maybe being persistent. Would the caterpillar itself object to that? No. Would it would it sort of, uh, would it be something a human being would describe a caterpillar as? Not really taking it very seriously? Probably not. And just finding words that sort of split the difference between the pro camp and the anti camp. So that's just one example. If anyone wants to sort of throw another phrase, especially a phrase that's familiar, that is kind of colloquial, that you may have heard before, I think those are really fun to unpack. But I also see we've got some experiences with writer's block. Thank you for those. I want to check in with the chat here. So Josh says, in my experience, my experience is not that I don't know what to say. I have a lot to say. It's selecting which thing to say first. Absolutely. That's something that I've experienced as well. And that's what I'm referring to in part when I say beginning is the hardest part. I may have 5 images in my mind when I'm beginning a poem, but much of the work of composing the poem is what happens between those images. And so the sort of orientation and journey and chronology of those images, you kind of, it's a lot easier if you have some idea of that when you pick the first one, if you know where you're going from that number 1 image to your number 2. And you can get a sense while you're making that poem of what that leap connotes, what kind of ambiance, what kind of architecture you're building. So I definitely agree that I think even if you have a framework that you're beginning with, choosing the point in that framework to begin from is very challenging. And sometimes you want to put faith in your revision process and just start with what's on the tip of your tongue. And that way, if you need to reorder later, you can do that. But often listening to yourself means listening to what is on the tip of your tongue and understanding that that is the most urgent thing that's in your mind right now. So I want to give Jeremy a chance. Jeremy says, I have found that when I hit a block, I go around it and try to resist the block on the next pass. I label it a block and come back to it later. Revisit the block as opposed to resist. That's a great practice, and something I've even done with drafts of poems is that very thing. So if you're working in a poem and you hit a block, I love the idea of just moving forward, maybe put what you have in bold so that you know to come back to it. That's a place that is unfinished in the poem. But even when I get to the end of a draft of a new piece, I often will not trust the immediate aftermath of having made something. I think we all have had the experience of, I was up until 3 a.m. making this brand new piece, and I woke up and it was trash, or just so disappointing to my own expectations of what I remembered having made. And that can really kind of throw you off. But often you're stuck in the wake of the exhilaration of making the work. What we love to do as artists is create new work. And it feels really good to make something that you think is good or that you think other people will praise you for. But that's auxiliary to the joy of just making something. So when you're remembering how good you thought a thing was that you just made, a lot of what you're remembering is the joy of making it. And for me, what I'll do is I'll put a draft of a poem in a drawer for 6 months, 9 months. And sometimes what I'll do is, if I'm going out back in the days when that was possible, if I was going out for a night on the town with some friends, I might leave my drafts on my desk or on my bed so that they're the first thing I see when I come home, and I've not been thinking of them. They've not been in my mind. I've had my mind elsewhere, because then I have a fresh point of view. It's my own point of view, but it's my own sort of unbiased or less biased point of view. So I think that that's a great tool to use when you're working on a piece. And then when you can go around line 6 in the poem that's just not coming together, that's a little clunky. And then when you get to a draft of a song or a poem or a drawing, just put that away, because the beautiful thing about art is that it is timeless. There's topical art, there's art that addresses a kind of certain event that happens in time. But if you write a great poem, it's great a week from now, it's great a year from now. And in poetry, it's a long tradition. It's great a century from now. You know, time is the ultimate kind of arbiter of value in that way. Time will hold on to what people in time will not let go of. So let time be on your side, and let time be an ally for you in your making in that way. Let's see what else. Mame, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced your name, Mame. But I see you there. You don't look too angry. So Mame says, I remove my mind from thinking my writing is performance-based and maybe under review. Yeah, that's hard to do, because often you're the one reviewing yourself, and that's the person you can't get away from, right? So there's one direction you can go in which you try to ignore or quiet the critical voice in your head, and there's another direction you can go in which you sort of answer it directly and really try to unpack and undress what those paranoias or fears are. If I'm worried at the outset of a new poem, I don't think, first of all, every time I'm writing a new poem, part of what I'm doing is proving to myself that I can write another poem. Because as soon as you finish a poem, until you write the next one, there's no guarantee you can ever do it again. That's part of the kind of terror and joy of the whole process. So actually addressing that concern logically can be very empowering. You say, well, I think in my mind, I'm hearing, I don't know that I can ever make another poem. What if I actually answer that? It's unlikely, having made several poems, that I'll never make another one again. I hope to live, knock on wood, a long time. I'm going to have occasional free time in that life. And I love words. And I think I'll probably write something that at least one person can dig for a second. Yeah, I think that is more likely than not. And just really answer the voice. If the voice says, this thing sucks, or person X, you know, we all have our little nemesis. Sometimes these are imaginary people, sometimes they're real. But if sometimes there's a person that you envision whose success can inhibit your own work somehow, if you're compared to that person, or if you know, you're competing with that person in some way. You know, if you're thinking person X would rate something so much better than this, or would never do this. Well, person X is a different person, and I'm me, and this is what I'm, and really just answer them as you would, as talk down to yourself as you would a frustrated child who may have just skinned his knee. You know, just calmly tell them what's going on. You've skinned your knee, you're okay, you're not going to be severely injured, brush yourself off. It's like if you see a child on a playground fall, if you notice, if you run up to that child and you treat it like a catastrophe, that child will be afraid, because you framed their experience as catastrophic. But if you go up to a child who's fallen down on a playground and you say, you're all right, how are you? And assuming the child is actually all right, and it's just a minor incident, you go, you're all right, brush yourself off now. You okay? You okay? How'd that feel? Okay, now get back out there. That child understands their experience as something that is not catastrophic, but that is natural. And they relate to their whatever pain they may feel differently as a result. And it's the same thing in writing. We're the children on the playground, and we have to be our own parents saying, you're all right, get back up, get back up. Let's see. Oh, we got, so thank you, Josh. We got another Josh point here. And then at the same time, I have more notes, but I'm really liking this interaction. And then at the same time, I have Kerouac and Ginsberg in my mind saying first thought, best thought. And then I have a whole new round of self-criticism. First thought, best thought um, can be very real. And often it goes back to that trust what's on the tip of your tongue thing, because we cannot, as writers or as artists, we cannot escape our obsessions. So you don't have to work against that, or you don't have to try to avoid that, or try to go into your obsession. Your obsessions are like your shadow. They are always with you, and they will come through in whatever you're making. So trust that they are there, and have like as many first thoughts slash hopefully best thoughts as possible. You know, sometimes it's just about volume, and then reordering or revising or saying this one doesn't work as well. This language doesn't stay with me. I keep forgetting what it is, even so it doesn't sound like it's really set in stone. Um, Giving yourself just opportunity upon opportunity can be really helpful. So I want to talk about verbs a little bit too. I know I got to adjectives and adverbs a little bit, but um, thinking about verbs, verbs are similar to adjectives in that they seemingly connote only an action without any positive or negative spin applied. So if I'm writing a story where Billy meanders up the block, it seems at first like it's simple. That's just what he does. He's meandering. That's the action he's undertaking. So that's what I've described it as. But beyond the pace at which Billy is moving, which is really what I, as the writer, was probably trying to describe, he's either going quickly or slowly. I'm saying he's meandering as a fun way of saying he's going slowly. But beyond the pace at which he's moving, what I've communicated with meandering is that Billy is without anxiety or stress, that he's comfortable and welcomed in his environment and his surroundings, maybe that he's familiar with the block. And so we're still describing a kind of bias. We're describing Billy with our own bias, if I'm saying he's meandering. And what we want to do is just be intentional about that whenever we're doing it. So we're breaking ourselves down and seeing what it is that we're doing so that we can be aware of how to do it to its greatest effect. So instead of meandering, let's say Billy's hustling up the block. And again, beyond the pace, he's moving faster when he's hustling than when he's meandering. We're communicating that Billy has some place to be and some kind of tension around getting there. And so this can be used to the writer's advantage as a kind of bait and switch. What we're doing often is manipulating the expectations of our reader. So if Billy's meandering up the block, the reader is more likely to be surprised by a kind of abrupt, urgent event, like a car crash or a gunshot or something like that. So what we want to do is work that muscle of hypersensitivity to our own language so that we can really rein in or let loose that which we're communicating within the language. So in all cases, we're trying to do the impossible. We cannot remove subjectivity completely from language. Language is a structure for subjectivity at its kind of conceptual heart. But we're trying to minimize subjectivity and bring the language as close to neutral as possible in order to kind of crystallize that exterior world we've depicted. So the more neutral the language, the more the reader has to fill in the blanks. And that's the experience as a reader that we most often love, right? When our mind is building a world, we're not just imagining the specific words we're reading. The words we're reading lend themselves to a wider world beyond those words. So take advantage of what you can build inside your reader's mind. And I think our own instinctual responses to our own writing, that sort of inner critic voice, can really be loosened when we surprise ourselves. So if we get ourselves out, the self that kind of comes back is the self that's seeing the plain language anew and can really then make greater use with greater power of language wielded with greater care. So being sort of more careful about, if I give the reader a little hint, if I say a word that's maybe a 2 out of 10 in urgency, Um, they're going to expect less, and then I can come in and surprise them with a 10 out of 10 urgency event. You want to kind of play off of these angles. And above all, writing, as with all creative arts, is a reflection and justification of our own existence to begin with. So it is difficult to justify existence, you know? That's no easy feat. So give yourself a little credit. But I would say that, of course, we feel the need to put down something meaningful on the page if we are to disturb the peace of our absence from it. Looking at a blank page for me is like, imagine waking up to a huge snowfall and the acres of land outside this window of yours with just fresh, pristine, untouched snow as far as you can see. And it is perfect. You would need a good reason to go outside and stomp around and put a bunch of footprints in there. Probably, right? Because when you come back inside, that view, it may be more interesting because the snow has been acted upon, so there's a story, but it's not perfect. And it was perfect. So you probably feel better if you have to go get your laundry so that you look good for your date that night. And that's why you spoil the perfect snowfall. If you have a real reason, rather than just saying, I went outside and I played and I stomped around and now it doesn't look perfect anymore. So having a kind of high bar unconsciously, permit yourself that, because what we're doing as creative people is difficult. And it's something that is incredibly rewarding, but it's difficult. And making any mark at all on a page is the same as stepping in that snow. You are claiming your place in a world that doesn't need you. Living in the world is not equal in terms of, you need the world to live in the world, but the world does not need you to exist. So in that way, we're all Davids looking up at our own Goliaths, holding our slingshots. And we should feel like gladiators, I think. And we should respect each other as gladiators and honor each other's work in that way. So I hope that this presentation and the technical, practical aspects of it, as well as the sort of emotional discussion, functions as rocks for us all to put in our slingshots. And I would then open it back up to any questions or comments that anyone might have.
Yeah, feel free to ask away again, guys. There's some great input earlier, and Soren, you've done a remarkable job there. Really great insight. I had a question actually,
Yeah.
which was, do you have a preferred writing environment or sort of process slash procedure that you like to be in or undertake when you are doing your creative writing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I am someone who makes my work for the most part alone. So I don't really work in a cafe or something like that. I really like having a private space because it can kind of make me feel like I'm disappearing. I know that may be kind of counterintuitive. You probably, most people go into a big city or a crowded place to sort of disappear, quote unquote. But for me, I like to be alone because I can really hear what I'm thinking, if that makes sense. Um, and I can really push it. And I have had times in my life where I really like writing to something musical, something without singing or words, because words will immediately distract me. But something orchestral, I really love. There's a musician named Max Richter, if anyone else listens to Max Richter, but he has an album called The Blue Notebooks, which is named after a book by the Russian absurdist writer Daniil Karms, who's fabulous. That's also a great book, The Blue Notebooks. But this album is something I used to write to a lot, and I would recommend that one. Otherwise, the more time that I have, it's a great luxury, I know, the better, because my process is that I like to read my way into writing. So I'll read poems, I'll read this book, I'll read a little bit of that book, And the way that language will first enter me is I'll just have a word or a phrase or a sentence. So they'll kind of begin in fragments, and I'll be taking notes on those, and it'll be a gradual moving over of a little less reading, a little more writing, a little less reading, a little more writing, and then I'm writing. But I do very much need that diving board of a book from which to jump off. And that's why time is really helpful in that regard.
Yeah, no, great answer. Thank you for that.
Josh, did you say techno is your go-to for writing? Or taiko? Taiko. I don't know taiko. Okay, I'm gonna write that down. I thought if it was techno, I was like, you're bold. That that makes my mind go off the walls. But we all need different things. And sometimes what you want to do is just jar yourself out of your usual practice. That's that kind of defamiliarization, excuse me, with your own work can really open new doors. And in the same way that you want to manipulate the expectations of your reader, you want to sort of, thank you, Josh. I'm going to check that out. You want to sort of manipulate your own expectations too. So there are days when I might go to a cafe specifically because it's less comfortable for me, less familiar, and seeing what that does to my writing. There are days when I will put on an audiobook so that I have to actively fight to concentrate on my own thoughts and see what that effect is on my writing. You want to kind of put yourself in different positions and be your own guinea pig in that way. That's when you're hitting blocks. You don't want to do this just for the fun of it, although maybe you do, but you want to take advantage of your positive momentum. It's when you hit a negative inertia that doing these things to just jar yourself and defamiliarize your process can really come in handy. Jeremy's asked, what does your daily routine look like on a work day while you are creating? It's hard. I will try often to write in the mornings before my quote unquote work day. And sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't. Even for me, just having the curtain, knowing the curtain will drop if I don't get up early enough, can inhibit my process. Excuse me, can inhibit my process because I'm thinking I got to get this done by a certain time, and it just messes up my flow. So I try to set aside pockets of time, an hour here, an hour right after work, and almost use the half brain that's still in my workday or worried about my workday as almost a kind of dreamscape to move through. But honestly, what's more effective is taking notes on my phone throughout the day. Because in the same way, when I'm having a dedicated writing session and I'm reading my way into writing and working off of fragments that come off of what I'm reading, fragments of language come to me just in life too, just in being alive. I think a lot of writers, most people don't actually think in language. Most people think in feelings and then have to assign language to that feeling. But a lot of writers, the thought actually occurs in language. And so you have these fragments that come, or you have, as a writer, you have this compulsive need to apply language to whatever the feeling is. Maybe that's what makes you a writer. So there's all different kinds of ways to find this identity, but just having your Fisher person net open as wide as you can to catch all of the language that will just sift through your mind in a given day. If you can, unless you're in meetings all day and you can't take out your phone and just write down, spider plant or whatever the phrase that is generating some kind of excitement to you is. That's been really helpful for me. So I got two of these. This is my spider plant is right behind my computer, which is why it's on my mind. This is spider plant 1. Oh, this is a big spider plant 2. I should have just done it like this the whole time. This is quite an ambiance, isn't it? But that's what I'm thinking of. I will say, for those of you who enjoy plants, There are little bugs that come with this thing. Be warned. You have to fight them. That's all I got about spider plants. Does anyone else have any questions or anything? Any comments? Any questions? Any plants? Let's make sure I can see everybody. No? Well,
Looks like Jeremy's typing away, it looks like. Or not really.
okay. We'll let Jeremy work. But these things are such a pleasure to think about. So I want to thank you all for thinking about them with me. My wife came in to join us. Is it normal to go through your writing process while thinking everything you write is crap? Between Two Ferns is a great comedy show. Speaking of plants, absolutely. But Jeremy, to address your question unequivocally, yes. Unequivocally, yes. Every writer thinks everything that they make is bad. Because every writer has the faith in order to try at all, even once. Every writer thinks that they can say something that matters. They may not have the confidence that they can do that when they try. But part of that lack of confidence is that, you know, there's no shame in not having something to say. The shame is having something to say that you cannot articulate. That's what scares a creative person. Not being able to claim your own feelings and share them, create bridges by virtue of communicating those feelings, create bridges to other people. That's what we're doing. So I think that, you know, everyone thinks that everything is crap because everyone wants to connect so badly with other people and wants to do so honestly. And that's a hard thing to do. But if you just put yourself in the position of your own reader, I'm thankful for anyone who tries to communicate to me, tries to tell me the truth about how they feel. And I don't hold them to the standard of perfection that I hold myself to. So be as generous to yourself as you would to another person.
Well, I think that is a lovely note to almost end this on. Unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time. So, Soren, do you have any sort of last parting words before we do end this talk?
I would just say to keep going and that we're all in it together.
Brilliant. Well, I thank you very much for your time. It's been a very insightful and personal conversation. Oh, we seem to have one last question actually from Jane, who snuck it in.
Oh, yeah. Do you ever find that reading your own lines again and again leads you to the next line? Absolutely. That's part of why building from fragments works for me, is because one line will lead you into the next. And you can be as determined about that as, you know, when you're reading Shakespeare in high school, you're instructed to look closely at how one line creates the next line, or how one line can almost define the line that comes just before it, when he's making new words and things like that. So when there's a piece of language that gets kind of caught in your mind, it gets caught there for a reason, because it's gotten its claws into your obsessions in some way. It's come into contact with what you are obsessed with as an artist. If it stays with you, it has some bearing upon what really moves you to create. So pay attention to that and take for granted that that line or image that has stayed with you has resonance. What you need to figure out is why. What is that resonance? Why is this line staying in my mind? And really paying attention and answering that question will often lead you into your next line, I think.